Yo, what's the word, everybody? It's your boy Trader Gray here, and welcome back to another episode of the Hunger for More podcast. And my guest today, his name is Zack Greenburg, and Zack is the senior editor of Forbes and also is responsible for the Hip Hop's Cash Kings list that always has hip hop in a frenzy about who's on top in the game when it comes to net worth and money. And also, he has written books on Jay-Z, Diddy, Dr. Dre, Michael Jackson, and a whole bunch of other A-list celebrities on their business ventures outside of the entertainment business. So I think you guys are going to get a lot of gems from this. I know I learned a lot about this, a lot of funny stories about when he met Jay-Z and his conversations with Kanye, just real interesting stuff and a lot of business type of stuff. So I hope you guys truly do enjoy this episode. And please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel at Trader Great so you can get the video interviews. Enjoy the episode, guys, and enjoy your weekend. Peace. From the beginning, I just wanted to say thank you for, doing my show. And for those that's listening, I'm here with Zack Greenburg. We've been trying to do this Skype connection, but it's been giving technical difficulties. But yeah, I wanted to get into you writing biographies and what got you into writing biographies and what made you start writing biographies on entertainment moguls.
Yeah, I think it was a matter of being in the right place at the right time. I'd been at Forbes a couple of years in 2009 when I got this email from an editor at Penguin, and she said, hey, would you like to write a book about Jay-Z or Diddy? She said, I said, yes, either. And we talked about that a little more, and we settled on Jay. And the book, I think, it came about because she'd been reading my stories at Forbes and my coverage of the business of hip hop and so forth, and there had not been, sort of like a serious biography, business focused biography type of thing written about Jay before, and actually she approached me before it had even been reported that he was going to be putting out Decoded. Mm-hmm. His book ended up coming out before mine by I think a couple months. But
what year did his book come out? In 2010,
yeah,
right?
Sorry, go ahead.
I said his book came out in what, 2010?
Yeah, I believe it came out in 2010, in early 2010, and mine came out in March.
2011.
And so, but I think that when I first started writing, hardest book, I think in a lot of ways is always the first one, because you don't really know how to write a book until you've done it. And I try to think of it as sort of just stitching together, a dozen cover stories, basically. And that really helped kind of guide me. And, ended up writing it in about 6 months or so. And it came out a couple months after Decoded. And I think it ended up being sort of like a nice yin and yang scenario where Decoded really broke down the lyrical side, and Empire State of Mind really focused on the business side. And I think to me the really most rewarding part of having written it is that I get emails from all over the world, entrepreneurs who say, thank you for showing me the blueprint of how Jay-Z built his empire, because I think he plays his hands a little close to the vest sometimes. And, particularly a decade ago, I'd say he really did. And, Decoded was so lyrically focused. There wasn't as much about the business side of things that I think people are really hungry to learn about. I think as time has gone on, Jay has shared more of that, sort of philosophy, and like his last album, I feel like was sort of a personal finance lesson as much as it was the hip hop album. But I think the goal for me with any biography is you tell the story, you really bring out all the sides of the character, but hopefully you also illuminate something that people can use in their own lives.
Okay, and you just said that you worked on this book. You researched him I read that you researched him for like a year, and in that year, like, what was the message that you wanted to get across in this book for people that read the book?
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons why Jay is so compelling is, he just shows that really any possible. As long as you've got that kind of intelligence and drive and work ethic, you can kind of make your way. And I think that that's something that people have related to, with him over the years. There are a lot of inspirational stories out there, and a lot of people who came from humble origins, but Jay really had nothing growing up, and just the stories from people who grew up around him, saying that he'd come over to their place to eat dinner because there wasn't any food on the table at his house, that kind of thing. He really overcame a lot of adversity from a ton of different angles, and so I think that part of Jay's origin story, his whole mythos, is that there's this aura of invincibility around him, and so I think especially earlier in his career, he was reluctant to want to show anything that could be perceived as weakness. And I think sometimes that included, not talking about things that, like some kinds of adversity that he had to overcome.
Anything that doesn't make him seem cool, right?
What's that?
I said basically he didn't want anything that doesn't make him seem cool out there.
Yeah, totally. So, whether it was, certain stories from when he was coming up, or, certain business deals that didn't quite work out, he kind of swept those under the rug. But I think that for any entrepreneur, the stories of what happens when things don't work out, I think those are just as instructive, if not more instructive, than the stories of the great deals. And so there's a lot of both in there in the book. And I think the book came out at a time, like I was saying, where he just, he was really focused on this idea of invincibility, and, the idea of seeing both sides of the journey, I hope, and I've heard has been helpful to people, looking to follow in those footsteps.
Mm-hmm. Of course, as you just said, he hides a lot of, well, not hide a lot of things, but he just doesn't speak on a lot of things. What were some of the obstacles you faced trying to get this book done?
Yeah, the funny thing about it was, of course, I went in the beginning and tried to get his cooperation, sit for an interview, and I went through John Manili at the time, who was kind of his consigliere. Jay doesn't have a manager; he has a consigliere, or a business associate or whatever. And the response that I kept getting was like, maybe like, I don't know, maybe you should rip up this deal, and maybe he would do a business book with you if you wanted to ghostwrite it. Maybe, there was a lot of that kind of stuff going back and forth. And
was it tempting?
I was like, no, I have this deal. I'm going to write the book. I have this great opportunity to tell the story. And he just, he kept on being maybe until my deadline. So, that was definitely an obstacle, because I kept holding out hope. I figured out his mailing address, of his Tribeca triplex or whatever, and I sent him like a handwritten note and all this stuff, and never heard back from him. So I think there was definitely some challenges trying to write a book where the main character doesn't want to talk to you, or where it's not clear if he's going to talk to you or not. But I think that enabled me to, it kind of pushed me to dig deeper and search for more of his high school classmates, or dig up producers who'd worked with him before Reasonable, things like that. Spent a lot of time talking to like Clark Kent and Fab Five Freddy and Branson B, and a lot of luminaries in the hip hop world who were around him at various points in his career, and was able to get some. Dame Dash ended up talking to him, and really getting kind of a perspective that from some of the people who maybe, if I had been doing the book with Jay, I don't know that he would have set me up with all those people. I don't know that he would have set me up with his high school classmates or with DeHaven Irby or, David Dash. I'm not sure that if I would have found those links to Fab Five Freddy or Clark Kent or Branson Beat, all these guys who have just these tremendous stories and experience in the hip hop world. So, I think that was the main challenge, but it kind of pushed me to write a different and more deeply reported book than I might have otherwise.
Yeah, I know. It was pretty good, man. I really did appreciate that book. Well, Jay-Z unauthorized the book, of course, and he also had some hard words for you when you two crossed paths at the Made in America Festival. Can you speak on what transpired between you and Jay that day?
Yeah, I was covering the Made in America Festival for Forbes, and so the way they had it was a VIP area and there was a media area and there was a bunch of porta potties in between. And so if you needed to go to the bathroom, whether you were a VIP or a lowly journalist, you had to go to the same toilet. And I was walking out of the bathroom and Beyonce, and they were just standing there with a couple people. And so I walked over and I said, hey, I'm Zach, the guy who wrote the book about you. And he sort of like pretended not to hear me and sauntered away. And then he looked back over his shoulder and he said that he sauntered around the corner.
What he said? What did he say?
And that was the last I saw of him. And so,
Zach, what did he say?
That book was horrible.
He said that book is what?
That book is horrible. and then he laughed, that kind of high pitched laugh, and then he walked away. So I immediately went back to the media tent and I wrote up the interaction and I called it Jay-Z's review of the book I wrote about him.
Yeah, I read it last night.
Yeah. So
how did that make you feel in that moment?
Well, it made me feel like he probably read it or he had somebody read it, and when I set out to write something, I don't really write it to make the person I'm writing about happy necessarily. I don't set out to piss them off either necessarily. But I feel like if somebody's writing a biography about you, you would probably have some feelings about it one way or the other. So, I kind of feel like I feel like I got in there, and I was actually interviewing Puff a couple of years later, and I told him about this interaction, and he was just messing with you, like he's a cool cat. And I said, okay. So apparently that's kind of his way.
Okay.
So what does it mean? I'm not sure, but I'd say I have a cordial relationship with his team these days, and although every time I do a new edition of it, I check in and I say, hey, does he want to talk? It's always like, oh, we'll check, but yeah. It's not like
they always say Jay-Z is the master of the spin.
But it just, he's certainly increasingly busy over the years.
Mm-hmm. They always say Jay-Z is the master of the spin. He know how to spin people. But if you could guess, is there anything in the book that Jay probably could have been offended by, in your opinion?
Well, I think especially at the time, to go back to this idea of invincibility, he was there were a few stories in there that showed what happens when a deal doesn't work, and frankly, it wasn't. In most of these cases, it wasn't his fault. It was, due to other people flaking out, or, in my opinion, other people being racist and not appreciating what he brought to the table, not appreciating what hip hop was, and there's a specific example of that, I thought, with this thing called the Jay-Z Jeep, and it was, there was a period of time, let's say, I think it was about 15 years ago, and Jay-Z had come up with this idea, Jay-Z and Steve Stout, that they would have like a patented color called Jay-Z Blue. And that, you could put it on cars and phones and your house, who knows, whatever it was. And it was going to be like, this extension of his brand. And so one of the applications of it was going to be a Jay-Z Jeep. And they put this whole deal together. And I talked to two of the guys, Marcus McCammon and MC Search, the kind of golden age rapper who then kind of semi-retired and then went to go work in Detroit, and basically in these two guys came together with their auto connections, and they had this presentation ready. It was going to be like the Jeep Commander, if you remember. That was kind of the granddaddy of the Jeep line at the time, and it was going to have buttercream leather seats and this great sound system, and it was going to only come in Jay-Z Blue, and they had it all lined up, and there was sign off on some level at corporate, and then Jay-Z was going to fly out and everything, and then at the last minute. They put the kibosh on it, and basically the impression that I got was that, from talking to Serge and to Marcus, it was like people down the line thought it was a cool idea, but there was some concern at the top that, this like rapper image would scare off some of their more affluent customers, which to me is, pretty clear code for racism, and just like this total lack of understanding about what hip hop's all about, what Jay-Z's all about, and it's crazy to think that any advertiser, no matter what thoughts they might harbor privately, wouldn't want Jay-Z involved with their product,
Exactly.
But I think it just goes. Just yet another example of how insidious this stuff is, and it's a thing that I think Jay-Z has bumped up against, more earlier in his career than let's say he was eager to talk about, like he didn't talk about it so much, those kinds of deals, or. I think, he really started talking about this kind of stuff, certainly when it came to champagne. And there's this example of the managing director or the head of the company that made Cristal. He was interviewed by The Economist. I think it was around the same time, 2005. And the interviewer said, "What do you think about all these rappers rapping about your champagne?" And he said, "Well, we can't control who buys our product," as though if he could, he would prevent rappers from buying it or singing about it, rapping about it. And so Jay-Z caught wind of this, and he issued this boycott. And I think at the time a lot of people in the mainstream press sort of made fun of him. It's like, oh, Jay-Z, you have such terrible problems, with this, you're boycotting the champagne company. But I think a lot of people dismissed it because it was because it's champagne and it's like a high-end problem. But if you think about it, I mean, it's another pretty insidious manifestation of I think the stuff that we're now like finally getting into the spotlight on a national level, and I think Jay-Z's become more vocal about this kind of thing.
I think that's the same thing. I think that's the same thing that happened with the Rockaware situation. They went to Iceberg, and Iceberg basically didn't care if they was wearing their clothes or not, so they decided to start Rockaware. So it just shows you just the disconnect that the higher ups have. Well, I think it's kind of changing now. Now people understand the power of hip hop, but back then there was still a disconnection from hip hop and corporate.
100%, and it was really fascinating talking to people over the years who've been at the intersection of that, like Kevin Liles or Steve Stout, and who've been kind of serving as that bridge between the hip hop world and mainstream sort of advertising, and it's really like it's only been. I mean, it really hasn't been so long since hip hop was radioactive to a lot of advertisers, and I think that the excuse was always like, oh well, Tupac and Biggie and violence and whatever, but we're talking mid late 90s when that was going on, and people were still having that reaction to hip hop 10 years later. I mean, something doesn't really add up. And to me anyway, and to a lot of people I talked to for the book, it's just part of the broader systemic issue. But it's been interesting to see Jay's evolution on that, and to some of the topics that he's gone to from now that from looking at his early albums to now talking 444. Just like a complete evolution of an artist.
Mm-hmm. Then the story came out that Jay-Z is officially hip hop's first billionaire. If you do remember, 'cause I know it's been a while since the article came out, but what were the assets Jay-Z owned that made this possible for him to become officially a billionaire now?
Yeah, it was interesting with Jay because a lot of times when somebody becomes a billionaire, it's one company and it takes off and they own, half of the company and the company is worth, a couple $1 billion and there you go. And it's a little more complicated. Of course, there's all kinds of other things that go into the research, but with Jay, it's always been a really tricky one because it's not like it's any one particular thing that got him there. It's just he's pretty diversified, and between Armand Brignac, that's a big one for him. Duce, certainly Rock Nation. Those are three of his bigger assets. Those are all assets that we count as 9-figure type of assets. But it's actually some of his other stuff that kind of put him over the top. There a lot of things that let's say those were maybe the biggest assets, but something like he threw a few $1 million into Uber pretty early on, and was able to turn that into I think about $60 or $70 million by the time of IPO. He's got this tremendous art collection that he started buying, probably, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And he's got Basquiat's and I think he's got some Warhols, and, that stuff is appreciated tremendously over the years. And, real estate for him has been great. He had that Tribeca triplex, I think that doubled or tripled in value for what he paid for. Oh, now it's probably down a little bit. But for sure. He's been really crafty and not putting all his eggs into one basket, I think. So it's been a matter of like looking at all those different eggs and seeing what's as each one gets bigger.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a perfect segue is into your new book, A-List, because when you think about Jay-Z and just him using his platform and fame to dominate the business world, I think that's mainly what you were talking about in A-List, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because I'm now working on a new chapter for the Jay-Z book, for Empire State of Mind, that kind of fits into the whole A-List Angels thesis. So yeah, A-List Angels was my book, which came out in mid-March, which was a great time to release a book about celebrities investing in startups. But no, there you have it. It was kind of the story of how entertainers like Ashton Kutcher and Nas and Sophia Bush and Shaq and Tony Gonzalez were able to kind of parlay their star power into owning pieces of startups. And, everyone, companies from Airbnb to Spotify to Uber, getting in, early before they go public and sort of like reaping the rewards of that come along with fame. And one of those rewards is being able to put in, to kind of cut the line and invest in these companies early on in exchange for, kind of having that star power attached to it. And it's proven to be just like a super valuable, way of doing things for a lot of stars. So it's been really fascinating to watch. Like Nas was really, he became kind of like the shining example in hip hop of, how to invest in startups. And, he teamed up with a really great manager, and he's been close with Ben Horowitz, who's a venture capitalist.
I read your article.
Yeah.
I read your article, and I seen that Nas done invested in over 170 startups. I said, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
They hustling hard out there.
Oh yeah, he's been in early on Dropbox and Lyft and Casper and all these other ones, and but it was kind of fascinating to watch because when you think business and hip hop, you think Jay, you think Puff, you think Dre, but it turned out to be Nas who kind of got out into the lead when it came to investing in startups, and he's even started his own fund called Queensbridge Venture Partners, UBVP, and then Jay started his own fund, and he called it Marcy Venture Partners, MVP. And so it was sort of like, both of them named their fund after the project that they grew up in, but it kind of gave another layer to the rivalry between Nas and Jay. It was like, 15 or 20 years ago, I guess it was, they were battling over, they were battling lyrically. Now they're battling, for deal flow or whatever. And Jay kind of quietly has gone out and, raised a fund. I think it was $100 million that he raised. So, they've invested in Rihanna's lingerie line, and they've invested in some really interesting companies. Hungry is a good one, and so forth. And so, Jay-Z has sort of like now taken on this new way of challenging Nas, right? He's challenging him on the venture capital front. It's the next frontier.
And do you think that, I read that you said, the video that you made about artists not wanting endorsement deals, they want equity, and you were talking about 50 Cent, what vitamin water deal is what inspired Ashton Kutcher to, basically he's now seen the power of celebrity. Can you speak a little bit about that?
For sure. I mean, I did a cover story on Ashton in 2016, and it was about how Ashton had sort of become the face of the celebrity investing craze, which has been more than a craze. It's just kind of become part of the sort of system out there. And Ashton said that the first inspiration he had to start doing this was in the late aughts, mid to late aughts, and he saw that 50 Cent had gotten this huge check. It was like $100 million. from the sale of vitamin water to Coca-Cola. And it was because 50 had taken equity. I think he took equity and some cash instead of just cash in exchange for partnering up with vitamin water and having his own flavor, Formula 50, and doing all those commercials and what have you. So Ashton had just done a commercial for like Nikon or something and gotten paid in cash. He's like, why am I taking cash when I could be out there getting equity? And so he basically just said, you know, right, I'm going to go and like call up all the people in Silicon Valley who are venture capitalists, and I'm going to go and, you know, and learn from them and sort of use my celebrity to get in the door. And this was back in 2009, which was like during the Great Recession, and, you know, Silicon Valley wasn't so cool or so hot at the time. And, you know, here's Ashton Kutcher going up to San Francisco and sitting down with all these guys and kind of learning the ropes. So he got let in on some really good deals at a really opportune time. Uber, Airbnb, and so forth started his own fund. And, you know, and then he kind of became the next blueprint, right? It's not just investing or taking equity in exchange for endorsement. It's like, can you start your own fund and use the access that you have as a celebrity, you know, to put together like a whole portfolio of companies that you can then bring in outside investors and, you know, and like really multiply everything by get to a much larger number.
Yeah, it's really dope, man. And I loved your Joe Montana article, and it just really shows that your personal brand is way more important than your money that you have, because your celebrity can get you into the doors that somebody with money will never get into.
Exactly. I mean, you know, there are so many billionaires out there who, you know, if you got a call from them and they said, you know, I'm John Doe or Jane Doe, you know, you wouldn't know who they were, even if they were, you know, the richest person in the state of Montana or something. But you get a call from Joe Montana, and you're gonna listen. You're gonna pick up the call. You know, so if you're, you know, if somebody in your office comes and brings you the phone and says, hey, I've got Joe Montana on the line, you know, you're going to pick up that call no matter who you are. So, yeah, Joe's been another really active investor. And I think that, you know, in terms of starting his own fund, he's just found that he's able to make these connections. And the entrepreneurs of, you know, running the companies that he's invested in are, you know, they know that they've got that kind of in their back pocket, and it can be super helpful.
Yeah, because you now see the wave of the personal brand now. Everybody wants to be a personal brand, and I think it's really smart, because when people know you for other things, it's easier for you to do business with people that like you already and they're aware of you. When you have no awareness, you're kind of vulnerable. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What's something you took away from writing that book? I can't wait to read it. I'm still waiting on Amazon to send my copy in, but like, what did you take away from that book, from the A-lister? The A-list, what's the whole name of the book? A-list?
A-list Angels, yeah.
A-list Angels.
Yeah. I think, to me, you know, with A-list Angels, the story is like, when you think of the entertainment business, when you think of the sports world, it's like, okay, well, you know, here are all these superstars, they have all this money. You know, why do we care that they're making more money off of their investments, off the top of whatever they make from playing ball or you know, singing songs or what have you. And but you know, if you think about it from a historical perspective, athletes and entertainers were paid pretty poorly, had very short careers, and then, you know, were kind of like typically, you know, ending up in bankruptcy and that kind of thing. And the opening line of the book is basically, I'm sitting in this like penthouse hotel suite with Shaq, and he's getting ready to go do a DJ gig, and he's talking to me about all of his investments, and and his career as a DJ and all the stuff that he's doing. I'm like, Shaq, why are you doing this? Like, why aren't you just sitting on a beach somewhere instead? I mean, like, why are you going and playing a DJ gig on a beach instead of just like sitting on the beach? And why are you spending all this time investing in startups and so forth? And he turns to me and he like leans in and he goes, fear.
What he said?
He said, fear. I was like, Shaq? It was like, Shaq, what are you, of all people, what are you afraid of? He said, you come up as an athlete, you read these numbers, it's some horrible percentage of athletes go broke within a few years of retirement. And he said, I was determined not to do that. And so I kept busy. I also decided to make sure I did a good job investing in startups. So Shaq also got in early on Uber, Lyft. He got in early on Google pre-IPO, even in his playing days. So, and he's kind of quiet about it.
That's how Jay-Z,
I think the lesson of the book is like, when you have rappers and athletes and movie stars, kind of doing these other things and making investing cool, making engineering and coding cool. A lot of people I think can look up and see inspiration to other paths besides becoming a ball player or going into music or so. Not that people shouldn't do that, but like, oh man, like let me check out engineering, or like let me learn how to code. Just sort of like the places that the influence generated by fame has taken some of these stars. I think it's a chance to like open up a whole other set of doors and examples for their followers to kind of look at and aspire to.
Yeah, because now it's becoming a wave, because now you see KD and Serena Williams, they're becoming high-profile investors also in Silicon Valley. So I think it's pretty dope. Did you do an article? I think you spoke briefly about what Serena Williams and Kevin Durant is doing in the tech world.
Yeah, a colleague of mine who covers the sports side of things more did those stories for Forbes, but same idea as Ashton, same idea as Nas, and it's pretty awesome what they're doing. Yeah,
I wanted to go into your backstory a little bit. Were you born in New York?
Yep.
Yeah. What was your upbringing like growing up in New York?
Yeah, grew up in the city in the mid '90s, and so it was interesting. Like, I think the first CD I ever bought with my own money, I was 12. Mm-hmm. I went out and bought No Way Out.
Classic.
And I think I bought Sublime, and like. The Titanic soundtrack, I must confess, those were my first movies. And I think that hip hop really, I don't know, it really drew me in, and although say what you want about Puff and about like that era, but it's just sort of like there's an undeniable. There's just a feeling to it, and it really pulled me in, and I think in a funny way, late '90s commercial hip hop, and all the samples really clued me in to old school hip hop and like the songs that were being sampled, so like you listen to Puff Daddy and the Family and No Way Out, and then you get the sample of The Message and Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, and so it's like, whoa, okay. And it kind of, there's this whole new world that opens up, and you go and you can explore the lineage of hip hop and get into some of that golden age stuff, which I think is just I think that's, I think early to mid 90s hip hop and alternative and grunge rock, it's just like, man, I think that was such a great era of music across, a few different genres. But, it's, definitely growing up in New York, you just like hip hop is all around you. And it's hard not to be kind of, like to fall under its spell, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. At what age did you fall in love with writing?
So my parents were both writers, and I always thought like I didn't want to be a writer because I didn't want to do what my parents did. But I always loved writing, and my first professional story was my first job was shelving books in the library for $3.75 an hour. Mm-hmm. My first writing gig, I was 14. I got paid like $50 to write a story about video games for Boys Life magazine. So I was always around writing, and what I really wanted to do initially, to avoid going down the path my parents went down, I wanted to work in baseball. I wanted to be a Major League Baseball general manager. And I even in college, I think I applied for an internship with the Yankees and I got turned down. But I also was applying for writing jobs, and I got this opportunity at Forbes to be an intern, and so I just decided to go with it.
I was about to ask. That was like my next question. Like, how did you get into working with Forbes? Can you like break down that story of how you started working with the company and then eventually becoming their senior editor?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. I was working on the college newspaper, and I walked into the building, and on the bulletin board it was just a letter from Forbes, and it said interns wanted.
What year is this?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I applied. I think they wanted to hire my editor at the paper, who was a year ahead of me, for the summer, but then he took a job with the Wall Street Journal or something, and they made me the offer, and I was like, yeah, I would like to do that.
What was the first thing that you did there when you started?
First thing I wrote, I was writing stock picks, which is sort of strange. Like, why would you have an intern writing stock picks? Mm-hmm. Good question. But pretty much you would, there are just all these analysts on Wall Street, and they follow, all the companies in a given sector and put out reports. And so the idea was that you would go through and sort of run some numbers and see which ones seemed to be undervalued or had a good story behind them. And then you would call up some analysts and get some quotes, and and you put out the story. And so the analysts always liked it because, if they're saying buy a stock and you're quoting them, then more people are finding out about that and more people are buying the stock. Mm-hmm. I think as a journalist, it's like you're always looking for what's the story behind something. So, if there's a story behind a stock, they have some great product in the works, or they're undervalued because of something, or there's some amount, something that doesn't really, something good about the company that doesn't really, come through in the numbers, and you can kind of distill that into a few hundred words. It makes for a good, quick story. So, that's what I was, what I kind of cut my teeth on. And then, I started writing about the business of hip hop when I started full time in 2007, and an editor came into my cubicle and she said, "You're under 30. Do you like hip hop?" I said, "I love hip hop." She said, "Great. We're going to put together the first ever list of the top earning rappers." And I was like, "Okay, I'm in." And I ended up writing the story about how Tupac at the time was making more money dead than all but like 5 living rappers.
Was that the first article to go viral?
Yeah, I think it was, because we did this little, I wrote the story about Tupac, and then we had this little sidebar, the top 5 hip hop cash kings, and I was out reporting a story, and somewhere in the Southwest, and on the radio comes a song. It's like, I get money, Forbes, 1, 2, 3. And it's suddenly Jay and Puff and 50 Cent are rapping about Forbes.com and all this stuff. And it was because they had been listed at 1, 2, and 3 on this list. And I got back to New York, and the editor was like, you need to make this your thing and run with it. And she took another job somewhere else. But I kind of, doubled down. And I think the thing that really resonated with Jay and Puff and 50 at the time was that Forbes was covering hip hop in a dignified way, and not just like, oh, here's this fad rap music, and which so many other publications were doing at the time, especially on the mainstream business side of things, and so my mission was to kind of bring that dignified coverage of hip hop into Forbes as an ongoing type of thing, as opposed to just here and there, and that's what we did, and to Forbes' credit, all the way up to Steve Forbes himself, there's been definitely like an openness to hip hop and to kind of viewing it as the business phenomenon that it is, more than just a phenomenon, but a reality, and and just like an inextricable part of American culture.
Mm-hmm. Now, what are the requirements your team needs to calculate accurately how much an artist made for the year?
It kind of depends artist to artist. Some are harder than others, but there are databases out there where you can get concert data and you can get record sales data. The tricky part comes in looking at the side deals and clothing lines and outside investments and so forth. And so that's where, having relationships and calling people and bouncing numbers off of people.
Were there ever an artist that was like, you guys tried to like calculate everything that they did for the year and you guys just gave up? It was just like, this is too difficult?
No, because you can always, it's always out there. It's always out there. You just have to make sure you're looking hard enough.
Is there anybody that you guys reached out to that declined to be a part of the list?
People decline to comment. People tell you that, because we'll always reach out and say, hey, we're doing this estimate. We think it's going to be somewhere in this range. Like, let us know if you have any guidance. And sometimes they don't reply. Sometimes they write back and say you're too low. Occasionally they write back and say you're too high. And then there's always like a divorce or something coming up. It's people have different motivations always, right? Like, and for some people, being the number one, or being a top earner is a major motivation, and some people would kind of rather keep it more under wraps.
It's definitely bragging rights.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any artists or like upcoming moguls that you think has the potential to be high on the list in the next few years? Like any artist that you got your eye on that you're like, yeah, in a few years he's gonna be a top earner. I think it's gonna be Russ, me personally. But
yeah, I know. I mean, I think that's Russ is a great point. He's somebody we've featured, and I've interviewed a bunch of times. But man, he really gets it, and he's really figured out how to do the independent thing, and the DIY thing, and Russ is somebody who's really well positioned, sort of to come through COVID, and to make it through the other end on top, because he everything's DIY. Like, he knows how to do everything himself, so he doesn't need a studio. He doesn't need producers or what. I mean, sure, he works with other people sometimes, but he could totally do it all himself. But I think Russ is really well positioned. I think like, obviously Megan Thee Stallions, we've been really coming up over the past couple of years to the top of the game. And I think Travis Scott, I mean, it's hard to say, like, to call somebody like Megan or Travis, an up and comer, but from the perspective of Forbes, where we're saying, who's going to be like on the tippy top of the list, I think somebody like Travis Scott, he has that sort of that creative energy. On the kind of in the same ballpark as a Kanye, and you never know when an idea like that is going to turn into a $1 billion business, right?
I feel like the right idea, he's gonna skyrocket because his fan base is crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like anything Travis Scott sold out. So once he gets the right idea, I think it's gonna be great. And speaking of Kanye, I wanted to talk about Kanye before we close up.
Yeah.
I feel like there's like this love-hate relationship between Forbes and Kanye. Can you explain like what really happened? Like, cause there was a confusion at first because he said that he showed you guys an $890 million receipt and you guys still didn't consider him a billionaire. But then you wrote that you don't recall that ever happening. So like, can you explain like what really happened and why didn't you guys consider him a billionaire?
I'm not really sure what he was referring to with that. But the story on Kanye being labeled a billionaire was around this time last year. I did a cover story on him, and that was focused on his earnings. Mm-hmm. And I think he had made $150 million in the year, and this was like the first big business story on Yeezy, where we really like sort of dug in and validated the numbers and determined that yes, it was a $1 billion company in that it was doing over $1 billion in sales. I think later on, I don't know, I'm not really sure. He kind of just like decided that he felt miffed about that article, even though after it came out, the feedback that I got, he was like, great job, man. So honored. That was kind of the feedback. And then I guess he kind of changed his mind and he felt miffed that we hadn't called him a billionaire yet. But just because a company is doing $1 billion in sales doesn't mean that, we're necessarily calling the person who owns the company billionaire. And so over, let's say, over the winter, we started going back and forth a bunch, and he was adamant that he could prove it. And, sure enough, I guess it was this spring, his team produced enough information in terms of like, statements and evaluations from neutral third parties and so forth that could really kind of back up the structure and the numbers, to justify calling them a billionaire. So once we had that evidence, we went ahead and made the call, and
then there became another issue. You guys said it was 1.3 billion, and then he texted you guys that it was 3 billion. What happened there?
Yeah, I think with him, a lot of it is, I think he wants the number to be as big as it can, and when we say somebody's a billionaire, it means like their personal net worth is $1 billion between liquid assets and stakes in private companies and so forth. And there have been estimates that his company might be worth $3 billion, but because of the nature of the company and the agreement with Adidas, although he owns the brand 100%, it's not like he could just go and run and like sell it to Nike tomorrow. It's there would be, I think, some issues with the existing intellectual property. That like some stuff I think would stay with Adidas. It's not really practical at this point. It's to sell something like that. So. It's hard to value. So what we ended up doing is we talked to a lot of people in the business who buy and sell, publishing catalogs and things like that, where you you might own the rights, but you have a royalty stream, and and because Kanye does get a royalty, he gets like a pretty hefty royalty off and stuff. So he, basically the way that we calculated it was more along those lines, because it was such a unique deal. We felt that was a more accurate way to kind of capture what something like this would actually be worth. It's all in the story. I think we called it Kanye West is a billionaire and he really wants the world to know. We kind of like laid it out there blow by blow, and
I got a question.
It's sort of like being a referee, right? There's no vested interest. It's just like we try to call the shots as we see them, and it's never perfect, but it's as close as you're going to get. I mean, short of having robot umpires, which you can't really have in journalism.
I got a question. Who's the one receiving these angry texts from Kanye?
It's a mix,
Well, I think we ran through everything mainly, and I hope my listeners go out and go get the book. I'm going to read it as soon as I get it. I can't wait to read it because I think the narrative of what the landscape is right now is in that book. From just reading the description, I was like, oh yeah, I got to read this, because the power of the personal brand now is the real leverage in wealth now, because with a personal brand, you can get yourself into rooms and get deals that you never thought you could get, so I truly do appreciate your work, man, and I thank you for doing my show today. We should do this again, and hopefully next time,
I will have more books in the future to talk about. So, but for now, A-List Angels is the latest one, and I hope to have some more news soon.
And where could people find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is Zogblog. You can also ZioGreenburg.com has more info about my books and stuff.
Do you have another book I know writers don't really like to talk about what's the next book, but is there at least a theme? Do you have a theme of what your next book is going to be about?
Yeah, I mean the next project is a revamped edition of Empire State of Mind, to try to really add some more current flavor to it, digging a little bit more into Jay and what he's been doing in Silicon Valley. So, and I think along with that, it'll be a full update of the book, and throw in some other goodies in there too.
Okay, cool, dope, man. So I appreciate you, Zach, for doing this, man.
You bet.
I'm signing out, guys. Later.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thank you, man.
Bye.